Committee is now underway, and we'll note that Alder Scannell is present, Alder Gerlach is present, Alder Burnett is here, and Alder Weary. Can I have an approval of the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Motion by Alder Gerlach, second by Alder Scannell to approve the agenda. Any changes? No? All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. D is approval of the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Alder Scannell, second by Alder Gerlach. Any changes? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All right, does anybody else not like getting those spam risk calls? I'm sorry, I just... Anybody else get like 10 of those a day now? I don't know what's going on, but just looked over and there's another one. Okay, I digress. Under regular business, so everything that we do tonight will be a recommendation to the City Council next Tuesday night on the 20th. And starting with number 1, consideration of possible action on a request by resident at 1604 Hillcrest Drive to extend the payback period and waive the interest for the water assessments associated with the Hillcrest Drive reconstruction project. So Steve's not here. Director Burnett.
Steve is here.
Oh, you are? I thought you were just watching tonight. I thought you were just bored.
No, I'm not fully back.
Okay.
Okay, so we've received this request. Historically, on other types of assessments, sanitary storm, and especially on pavement, the city does have a policy for commercial properties that allows that to be extended from the normal 5-year payback period to a 10-year payback period. Upon petition, there have been limited instances where we have allowed residential properties to also enjoy that same 10-year payback period, which is why this is coming before INS tonight. However, the second part of the request is to waive the interest payments. The city has to borrow money to pay the contractor in order to front that on behalf of the resident. And especially with the water assessments, DPW has to borrow that money because water, being a PSC regulated utility, needs to be paid in full. So there are absolutely no deferrals when it comes to water. Anytime that the committee or the council grants a deferral relative to a water assessment, water utility has been paid and DPW is now covering those assessments. So we would be fine with a request to extend the payback period from 5 to 10 years, recompute the outstanding balance, and let the resident know what those new payments would be through the clerk's office. But staff is not in support of waiving the interest because of the fact that the city has to borrow that money in the first place.
All right. Alder Burnett.
Yeah, thank you, Director Grenier. Glad you're doing better. One thing, the property owner is not able to attend, so I don't know if I'm speaking on his behalf, but I think I know enough about the situation to say that I think one of his concerns was that the interest rate from when the work was done a year ago, in his opinion, the interest rate has increased. Director Grenier, is that true? Do you know?
When we establish the interest rates for payback period, it's based on the bond that we took out. So that interest rate does not change over time.
Okay. Do you know what that is by chance?
Offhand, I don't. I believe I would be guessing, but I believe the bond, the interest rates for the 2020 construction, I believe were at 4.77.
Okay. For some reason, he thought maybe when we, so as we all know, Hillcrest with the reconstruct this, so it originally came up 3 years ago. Maybe from the time it was done 3 years ago to a year ago, maybe the interest rate increased from the bond issue over that time. I don't know.
That could have happened.
Maybe that's what he was referring to. I think it's reasonable to extend to 10 years. This gentleman has some rather expensive dental work, and being a frugal individual, he was concerned about the, obviously paying more over the life of a 10-year extension versus 5 years. So he was hoping for a reduction in interest rate. But if staff doesn't recommend that, I'd be fine with extending the payback period to 10 years. And I'll ask him to, make a case, because it goes to the full council if he wants to pursue a further reduction of interest rate. They'll have to make a little better case for that provision. So if it's okay, I'd like to go ahead. I'm sorry, Chairman. I see.
Well, first I'll see if there's a second to motion, then I'll go to the motion.
Basically, the motion would be to allow a payback period of 10 years versus 5 years.
But you also moved something about the waiving the interest?
Yeah, the interest, I will not make a motion about the interest based off staff recommendation, that we would be breaking precedent, on that matter. So it would just be the payback period, Alder Gerlach.
Second.
All right, there's a motion by Alder Burnett, second by Alder Scannell. Attorney Mather.
Hello, Alders, and welcome back, Director Grenier, although not back. I just wanted to first, with respect to the interest rate, so the ordinance that actually allows for extension of the payback period does not make any mention of forgiving any interest. The interest is solely done in under a different ordinance that deals with a finding of indigency. So under 9.44, based on a financial hardship, you can extend from 5 years to up to 10. But that ordinance itself does not make any reference to eliminating or reducing or anything like that with respect to interest. So I understand that, this is a little bit moot now that Alder Burnett's motion did not include any reference to interest, but I did just want to make a record of that that's not, that would have to go under, I think it's 9.42 maybe. Anyway, it's a different process. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that the ordinance does require that the extension of the period be based on a finding of financial hardship. And I don't know if this individual has submitted anything in writing that the committee has been able to look at, or has made any, aside from speaking with staff, and it sounds like perhaps Alder Burnett has had any direct communication with the committee. But I would, my recommendation would be that unless you can make a finding of financial hardship based on the limited information that you have in front of you, I would hold it until that person can come in, explain the circumstances, and then you can put on the record your reasons for finding that there's a financial hardship.
All right, appreciate it, Attorney. Alder Burnett.
Yeah, thank you, Attorney Mather. I'm fine with that. I have been engaging with this individual for several years, and I keep trying to get it with staff. For whatever reason, he felt he was not happy with some of the response, and I'm not blaming anyone. It could have been a number of reasons. It might have been his issue. I don't know. But I preferred that it be dealt with at staff, and then staff brings something to us that states, yes, this person does have a hardship. All I'm going off of is what he tells me. So I want to be fair, but I want to follow the proper process. So Attorney Mather, you recommend that we hold it and then have him work with Public Works directly and keep me out of it? Is it?
The finding, yes, my preference would be that he work with staff, but I do note that it is the Common Council that has to make the finding of financial hardship. So while he can work with staff to submit whatever he thinks may be appropriate to the committee, if he would prefer to do that instead of appearing before the committee and ultimately before council, that may be one possible avenue to go down. But ultimately, it's the committee and not staff, and then ultimately council, but not staff that can make the finding of hardship. That's not something that staff can make a determination of on their own and then bring it to the committee and say, in our view, there is a hardship. That is, you guys have to decide that amongst yourselves.
All right.
If I may, Your Honor.
Sure. Anything else, Alder Burnett?
Well, I'm a little confused. So, I'm fine with holding. I'm fine making that decision, obviously, but I don't know if we have enough to prove that there is in fact a hardship. So I'd rather hold it rather than, I'm just a little confused. But anyways, Alder Scannell seemed like he had some comments.
Sure, Alder Scannell, then Alder Gerlach.
Yeah, I think, this is how we operate all the time with, staff does the work and they make a recommendation or don't make a recommendation, but they can do the work and provide us with all the information, and then we could work from there. So I think it's best that he's directed to work with staff, and staff vet all his information, and then they can present it to us with or without any kind of recommendation, and we can move forward however we decide, and then the council can move forward however it decides. All
right, fair enough.
Motion to hold then until the next meeting.
Second. But Alder Gerlach still wants to.
Yeah. Alder Gerlach first. Why don't you go first?
Question was on the floor, which was to extend the payback period from 5 to 10 years, period, full stop. Can we go ahead and approve that? And do we have to deal with this waive the interest at the same time, or can we approve that? Or do we have to hold the whole thing?
The extension, even the extension has to be based on a financial hardship.
Oh, okay. I didn't understand that. Okay, I will be quiet. Now you can do it.
All right. That's all right. Alder Burnett had a motion to hold the item, and Alder Scannell, I saw, had a second. And that's so that the resident can work with staff to get that needed information in. And then I assume, Steve, it'll come back to us then at some point because it has to be approved by committee and council. Okay.
That is correct.
All right, then. I think that's all we can do for this one. So any other discussion on that? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Big moment. Consideration with proposed revisions to section 8.11 Green Bay Municipal Code, noxious weeds and maintenance of vegetation. I think we saw this a month or two ago, perhaps. Dr. Grenier, did anything change?
Well, what has happened? This has come back to staff, and joining us tonight is Melissa Schmitz, the resiliency coordinator. Melissa and I have been working with members of the Sustainability Commission and members in the park staff as well over the past several months to try to come up with a draft, the new draft ordinance language to bring forward for consideration. So included in the packet tonight, Melissa has prepared a pretty exhaustive summary of the proposed changes, what those changes are and why, and then there is a markup of the proposed draft language for section 8.11. Also included in the packet was a copy of the street terrace policy, which addresses the publicly owned property in front of, on the side of, or immediately adjacent to private properties comprising the right-of-way adjacent to somebody's property. So with that, I think what I will do is turn it over to Melissa, and she can add on whatever else she feels is necessary.
Welcome back, Melissa.
Hi. Okay, I did hear in the very beginning of the intro, were there any changes from what your committee has seen from the very first time a couple months ago to now? One notable change that you'll see in your markup copy is from the original markup that you've had in your possession is there was a section in there that said the maximum amount of space allowable on a property for a planned natural landscape, and it was 300 square feet or up to 5% of the lot size. That has been removed. And that was removed based on staff feedback from parks and also Sustainability Commission member feedback as well. So that has been removed from the copy that you have tonight. There's been some other minor changes, but that's probably the most substantive change that you'll see. Also, I know I think I gave a background to your committee at the onset. I think I did, but these code amendments are part of a larger project that the city undertook starting at the end of 2019, a green infrastructure code project where there's several different municipal codes that are being examined for the incorporation of green infrastructure in the code language. So this is the first one. This is the first one of the codes that have been audited and are being looked at, part of that project. And then in addition to park staff, the code amendments were circulated to the planning department and the development team. So there's been lots of eyes on this. And then the Sustainability Commission has provided valuable feedback also, which is a citizen-led group. The city currently has a provision for planned natural landscape areas, and that's in the current code. The reason for the changes are there were some ambiguities identified in the code audit, and it's kind of a reorganization of this section of the code. There's been lots of definitions that were edited, and in some cases expanded to be more inclusive of green infrastructure and different types of vegetation that the city is encouraging property owners to incorporate as part of planned natural landscapes, and also better differentiating between noxious weeds and planned natural landscape areas. The other big change that you're already aware of is that this is asking for required registration of planned natural areas versus voluntary registration. And the reasons behind that are, I have 4 reasons, and I'm happy to talk about that now or open it up. And then the last point is that the review and enforcement and appeals process has been better outlined in the draft changes as well.
Committee, did you want to hear a little bit more on some of the reasoning, or do you want to open the floor? What do you want to?
I'd like her to go over her 4 steps that she promised us.
For the required registration?
Please.
Okay. So the first one, and these are in no particular order. These are not in order of importance. That registration, requiring registration will help city staff better be able to track and potentially inventory planned natural landscape areas and rain gardens using GIS, so that we can quantify pollinator habitats in the city and rain gardens as how that relates to stormwater management. And there's other things that work here too, as far as rain gardens and why that's important for stormwater management. Registration will also enable staff to offer technical assistance to applicants, before they get started on their project. And then we would also have the opportunity at that time to direct them to some local resources that might help them with their planned natural landscape areas, like the wild ones. There's a local chapter, Master Gardener volunteers, and the Brown County Extension Office. All really great resources for natural landscaping. Also, this is the one I probably feel most strongly about, is that I believe that the registration helps protect the property owner or the tenant who is ever putting in the planned natural landscaping areas. If a complaint arises down the road, they have an approved plan, and it really clears up a lot of the issues that may arise. And lastly, it could potentially make the role of the weed commissioner more efficient. If we have plans on file, the weed commissioner does not approve plans. They're on the enforcement side of mechanism of this. They can review the approved plan that we would have on file and work with park staff or other staff that have that expertise in verifying the species of plants in the event that there's a dispute. This isn't unprecedented that a neighbor or a complaint might come in saying, well, I don't think that's a real plant. I mean, I'm being very simplistic in how I'm versing that, but a weed versus a plant versus, if that really is indeed a part of a natural landscape. Those are my the four main reasons why I think registration is a good idea.
All right, fair enough. Any questions from committee? Anything else, Melissa, you want to add before we open the floor up?
No, just lastly, that the review and enforcement and appeal sections, they really haven't changed in verbiage all that much. It's just a lot more straightforward as far as lumping everything into paragraphs. It sort of outlines it A, B, and C in the event of an enforcement action for noxious weeds versus maintenance of overgrown vegetation versus planned natural landscaping areas.
All right.
Motion to open the floor.
Motion by Alder Scannell, second by Alder Gerlach to open the floor. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Anyone here interested in this item, please just give me your name and address. Yeah. That's fooled by. Only they'd wave a little bit.
Oh, man, come on now.
All right, Ned. Okay, you've waited long enough. Name and address, please, Mr. Dorf.
Thank you. Ned Dorf, 1321 Emily Street. I appreciate the committee taking this up again. And I did notice that major change had occurred in the language, and I appreciate that. I definitely felt heard, and I appreciate Steve taking the time to follow up with the phone call after the last meeting as well. And we had a good conversation. So thank you for making some of those major changes. And as far as feedback on the current draft, certainly the mandatory registration is something that I would still oppose. I think Melissa gave good reasons for registration, but I believe that should be voluntary, and that, all four reasons would be helpful to the homeowner, the property owner, and they should take advantage of that registration process. But I still disagree that we should be mandating a registration of a garden or natural landscaping, especially if we're singling out one type of landscaping project. I don't think that respects the private property owner's rights. I would like to counter that with the voluntary registration process. There are volunteers who have worked with the pollinator corridor over the last 10 years that would be willing to sit down with city staff and create language for perhaps a web page on the city's site, and you make some kind of registration process smooth for the public to use. So I would hope that we could do that and tap into some of the volunteers in our community. I am not one of those people that would be good at helping make a website, but there are people who work for the university who've been involved with the Pollinator Corridor project that would have a little more expertise in that than I would. As far as the setback, I know that originally it had been 3 feet. It still is 3 feet in this draft. I still would like to see that to 0 feet. I do notice that there have been some changes in the wording there, where neighbors have gardens growing together, or where a landscape goes into public property or into a naturalized area where there would be a 0 foot setback. And I appreciate those changes. But I would still recommend a 0 foot setback unless plants are spilling over into a neighboring property or growing into a neighboring property, as some of these native plants can spread vegetatively. So I'm just curious if there's a safety or an engineering concern with allowing, I guess, landscaping along that 3 foot strip. And I don't know if anyone can speak to that. Is there some kind of wiring or safety type concern?
Which 3 foot strip are you?
Along the side lot lines or the back lot line?
just going back to 10 years ago or whenever it was that we originally adopted the ordinance that's currently in place, I don't believe that it was anything relative to utilities or anything along those lines. To the best of my knowledge, or to the best of my recollection, it was simply a setback to allow a transition back to more traditional turf grass, which most lots have, to inhibit or prohibit the planned natural landscaping from going on to adjacent properties. There was a buffer strip required there. That's kind of the same reason that there was the 3-foot setback in the front yard if there is sidewalk present, is because some people don't, we did hear a lot of community feedback that people did not feel comfortable walking directly up against that planned natural landscaping. So they wanted the 3-foot setback from the sidewalk. So that 3-foot setback was then also carried to side and rear yards where you would be abutting a property that was not planted into planned natural landscaping. Again, the thought process being exercise of somebody's rights ends at the point that it infringes on somebody else's rights.
Sure. Okay. I guess practically speaking, if I have plants growing within 3 feet of the sidewalk, but they're not spilling out onto the sidewalk, is that something that would trigger a code violation?
Upon complaint, yes. And then what we would do is we would work with the property owner to say you are not compliant with the ordinance as written, and we need to get you back into compliance. But it doesn't mean that somebody would come out there and cut your planned natural landscaping down.
Okay. I appreciate that. I wonder if there is a way where we can, because there are some short native plants, right? There are some that won't spill out over the property line or spill out onto the sidewalk. If there's a way that we can note that there would be some allowances for plants to grow within that 3-foot space, as long as they are not crossing into public areas or a neighbor's yard. So that, I guess that's why I would recommend reducing it to 0, but then noting that if it is spilling into the sidewalk or into the neighbor's yard, then it would have to be cut back. The other question I had, I saw that the terrace planting, I appreciate that being attached to this agenda. That's actually the first time I've read that updated one. There's a statement in the draft of the noxious weed ordinance that says you cannot have a planned natural landscaping in the terrace. I guess I would counter that with a question about, as long as the plants adhere to the other requirements of the terrace area, I would think they should be allowed, right?
Technically, you would not be compliant with the planned natural landscaping because the planned natural landscaping is on private property. In the terrace, you're in the public right of way, so it needs to be differentiated. So if you were to submit a plan for planned natural landscaping on the private property, that plan cannot extend into the public right of way. You would need a special permit from the city to allow for that to happen. And as long as you are doing something compliant with the terrace policy, you're allowed to do that. Don't call it planned natural landscaping. For all practical purposes, they're the same, but there has to be a differentiation at that property line because of the ownership.
Sure, that makes sense. Feedback from the public, those were my main points. I did get some feedback from the public, concerns about natives being singled out versus cultivars, horticultural varieties. Why would a plan just be needed for a native versus any kind of landscaping? And would a plan need to be plants are added or removed from the planting? And then I did receive one concern about the height limit. There's a note in the ordinance change about a height should be maintained, maturity. And the note that I received said that plants growing in people's yards tend to receive more sunlight than they do in the wild and grow to a slightly higher height than in nature. Just a note on that. And I think those are the main points that I have and that I've received. So again, I'm hoping we can change that mandatory registration to voluntary, move the setback. And those are kind of my big concerns on this one, but I appreciate the work that's been done over the last month or so to change it up.
Thank you, Mr. Dorf. Any questions from Mr. Dorf from the committee? Alder Gillick?
Can you explain your reasoning for why you don't think that registration should be mandatory? Is it just on principle that you just don't want people to have to register?
Well, I would love if people would register. Part of the map out these native gardens, get an idea of how much pollinator habitat we have in the city. But I still strongly believe it should be voluntary. Nobody should be required to say what kind of garden they have in their yard or get approval from the city to do that. As long as you're not growing something illegal in your yard, I think the city should leave you alone. I don't think it needs to be approved by somebody. So yeah, it would be just a matter of principle for me. I hope people do register, right? It goes along with the project I've been working on for the last 10 years, but I maintain that it should be voluntary.
All right. Any other questions, Alder Gaylock? No? Anybody else? Anything else you want to add, Ned?
Should I talk about fluoride now or later?
You have 5 minutes.
All right, I'm done.
All right, anybody else here for this item? Anybody else? All right, I don't think we have anyone else here for this item, so entertain a motion to...
Motion to close the floor.
Second.
All right, motion by Alder Scannell, second by Alder Gaylock to return to regular order. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. What are your wishes? Who wants to go first? Oh, how about we hear from staff? Mr. Grenier, Director.
And I would like to echo Mr. Dorf's point. I think he and I have had some incredibly productive and very engaging conversations over the past 10 or so years, going back to when Mr. Dorf was an alder. So always a pleasure and love working with Ned on these issues. I am going to respectfully disagree with him relative to the registration. Staff did support a mandatory registration when this ordinance was originally drafted, and we'll continue to stand by that. And my reason as the department head is actually pretty simple. The weed commissioner and those of us who are charged with administering this ordinance simply don't have the background in these plants to be able to distinguish one plant from another as to what's a noxious weed, what's planned natural landscaping, and what is simply unmanaged growth. That's what led to the lawsuit with Margaret all those years ago, is because we went in and it was impossible for the weed commissioner to distinguish what was what, so we enforced the ordinance as it existed prior to the adoption of the planned natural landscaping. From our perspective, and I see Operations Director Pierlot's here tonight with us as well for a separate item, and I know Chris will back me up on this. When we get a complaint about unmanaged growth, if our staff can simply go to that registration database and say, no, that's planned natural landscaping, they have a plan on file, it's here, it's approved, it's done. That eases our ability. Now, if we have voluntary registration, I will tell you, I don't think, since the original ordinance was adopted, I don't think anybody's voluntarily registered their property. So in the 10 or so years that we've had, nobody has capitalized or utilized that voluntary registration. What I'm trying to avoid is getting my staff caught in the middle of an argument when we don't have the technical background. Now, we've been in contact with the Parks Department, and so far, Parks has been pretty good with us, but they've also told us point blank, we don't have the staff to go out and manage these calls either. So we simply don't have the number of staff, nor do they have the technical expertise to understand what these plants are and be able to make those determinations out in the field, and still continue to do our day jobs, as it were. So that's the reason that we do support the registration of these things. A flower garden is a flower garden, okay? I think most reasonably educated people are going to be able to go out and take a look and say, okay, somebody put some paving stones or rocks or whatever and made a garden of some sort, or they planted a tree, okay? Planned natural landscaping, as we understand it, is intended to be more expansive and take up a larger percentage of what's normally turf grass. And more often than not, if you're not part of that community, if you don't understand that, it's going to look like you just let your yard go native, okay? So what we're looking for is, as Melissa identified earlier, we're looking for an easier way to protect those people so that when we get the complaint, we can immediately access the database, say, no, they have a plan on file that is planned natural landscaping, and kind of free up our staff a little bit to continue doing what they're doing. Otherwise, we're going to have to go out and hire somebody, and we're not going to be very responsive on it. We're going to be responding to things in weeks instead of days.
All right. Elder Dorf.
Hi. I just have a question for Director Grenier. Director Grenier, is it easy for people their plantings? I mean, how do we even advertise that it's required now? Or do we give them a warning before we give them a citation if they didn't register it? I just wonder about the nitty gritty kind of stuff. How do you go about doing that?
Well, that's what we would do. We would start off with an educational campaign utilizing primarily social media and traditional media here in the market to get it out there, to let people know that the planned natural landscaping ordinance has changed. And if you do wish to have planned natural landscaping on your property, there is a requirement that you submit a plan and that you register. It's a no-cost registration. And what that does is it helps the staff to track those in case of a complaint. We would then also work with those folks to help them. And when we're talking a plan, we're not talking something that's overly elaborate. You're not going to have to go out and hire an engineer or a soil scientist or somebody else to do that. What we're talking about is getting something that shows the property on an aerial photo. So you could go to the Brown County tax parcel listing, Brown Dog, and print an aerial photograph of your property. And then with a Sharpie, you can draw in hand-drawn borders to say, in this area, I would like something that's this, this, and this. If you want to give us an extensive, you're going to be buying seeds from a commercial supplier that says it's this percentage of this cone flower. Okay, if you want to get that extensive, that's fine. But if you want to say, in this area, we're going to have prairie grasses, in this area, we're going to have shrubs, that's fine too. Okay, we're not looking for, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we don't want folks to have to invest tons and tons of time. What we're looking for is a common sense approach to things. Give us a rough idea of what you're putting out there so that if we get a complaint, and Lord knows I get complaints on this. If we get a complaint, we can take one of our guys who doesn't do this for a living. He's not a landscape architect. Send him out in the field with the plan, and he can look at it and goes, yeah, I'll buy that, to determine that it's in compliance. If we get And as Melissa said, there is a procedure a little bit further on that if there is a dispute, then we can continue to ratchet that up. But what we're looking for is to handle the 99% of things, not the 1%.
It does sound somewhat complex for perhaps older people that can't download, the picture or whatever. I understand where you're coming from, Director Grenier, and that's probably what's going to pass. I also understand where Mr. Dorf is coming from. Would it also be possible that if there was a complaint and someone didn't have it registered, that they then could register it without getting a citation?
Absolutely. You may not have heard it, but it's a line that Operations Director Purelot and I use all the time. Our goal is compliance, not citation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It does sound complex, though. But okay.
Let me give you a case in point, Alderdorf. In the past 14 months, the Department of Public Works has sent out in excess of 7,000 letters to property owners indicating that they are in violation of the ordinance for placing yard waste or leaves, not on the terrace, in the street. Right. We continue to try to educate people when it would have been very easy for us to just go around with a citation book and start racking up citations.
Right.
Okay. I would like to think that we have a demonstrated history of trying to work with people and be very upfront with the education and compliance end of things, as opposed to jumping the citation.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderdorf. Father Gerlach.
As much as I want to side with Mr. Dorf, Director Grenier has convinced me that it's only practical to go in that direction. But now I would like to go to that setback issue. And I wonder if maybe Melissa would like to comment on what he had to say about that.
Yeah, so the way that it reads in the amendments, and it didn't change from the last, is a 3-foot setback, unless a 3-foot setback on the rear and side lot lines, unless there is a permitted fence in place. Okay, so a lot of people have backyard fences. I have a 6-foot fence in my backyard and in a portion of my side yard too. So in cases where there's a permitted fence, where I applied for a permit with the city to put up this fence, in cases like that, then the setback is 0. But my interpretation and the way my support goes for this, or my staff recommendation, is that I do think we should have a 3-foot setback on the side lot lines and the rear lot lines as well, if there is no fence in place, because some of those plants do creep and it can cause hard feelings between neighbors. Whatever your opinion is on turf grass or a mulch 3-foot area or whatever it might be, I think that is a balance in the planned natural landscape areas, and I guess having some harmony in between neighbors. That's my personal feeling on this. And I can tell you, just from my personal experience, I've been a master gardener in Brown County for 15 years. I have a lot of experience in this, and I know how beautiful some of these landscapes can be, but I still like my turf grass too. And I know there's a lot of people out there like that. And I think we should, it's striking a balance so that everyone can get a little bit of what they want.
Thank you. Can I follow up, please?
Lynn?
I appreciate that. And I have to say that in my brief experience as an alder, I can just anticipate somebody's flowers lean a little bit too far to somebody else's yard. I'm going to hear about it. So I know what you're talking about. I want to make a quick comment. I want to say that whoever worked on rewriting this ordinance, thank you. I think you improved the sentence structure as you went. I like it. And finally, if we pass this, I know it has to go to the council, but if we agree to these changes tonight, I think we have to have some plan in place for how people are going to register or how we're going to make registration easy or accessible or something. Do you have a plan for that? That we'll be able to immediately tell people, and this is how you do it.
Well, I would say that we don't have like an immediate, I would like to see an online registration to make it as easy as possible. If people don't have access to the internet, then they would need to come in. As far as outreach goes, that's part of my job is outreach. So as far as getting the word out, I'll echo what Director Grenier said as far as having a social, putting it on social media. I would also recommend that we send letters or have correspondence with some of the local groups that have a stake in this, that have members in their organizations that do plan natural landscaping areas, like the Wild Ones and the Master Gardener Volunteers of Brown County. The reason being is because they get new members all the time. And so that might be an outreach mechanism to get the word out about these changes and about the registration process.
I wonder if it would be possible to have you say people who can't go online could come into City Hall and do this?
Well, so we're going to have some mechanism for registration. I think online is probably going to be the easiest for most people, where you can submit your documents. But to answer your question, do we have this like all ready to like happen in the next month? No, not yet.
Okay, and when you do, there are people who don't use the computer and just can't do that. So if there will be some kind of paper registration, could it also go out to all the neighborhood associations? So, and not just information, but an actual copy that they can make available to their citizens if they would like.
I mean, I can definitely work with Will Peters, who is one of the, he's the main liaison with the neighborhood associations. We can definitely do that.
I think that'd be a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Gaylock. Alder Scannell, Alder Burnett, questions? What would the committee like to do?
Did Ned still want to talk?
Motion to open the floor.
All right, motion by Burnett, second by Scannell to open the floor. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Floor is open. Mr. Dorf?
Thank you. I think it's a really important point to note that we don't know how people would register their gardens right now, right? There's not a mechanism to do that. That is something that we have not given people over the last 8 to 10 years, however long this ordinance has been around. So I think to say that voluntary registration hasn't worked is true. I think the reason for that is we haven't given the public a mechanism to do this, at least not one that the public is aware about. And that's a failing. When I say we, I helped write the ordinance, right? So I take some responsibility for not following through and figuring out how the public was going to register those voluntarily. I don't think that voluntary registration is a failure. I just don't think it's got the mechanism to work yet. So I would hope that the committee and the council eventually would allow this to be a voluntary process and create a simple way for people to register their gardens and landscapes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else? All right, let's return to regular order.
Motion to return to regular order.
Alder Scannell.
Second.
Made the motion, second by Alder Burnett. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. What would you like to do, committee? Changes, approvals, hold it for a year?
I think I'll make a motion to approve. I think I'm going to go with staff recommendations. I think, we can always tweak this as we go along. if necessary. I think the mandatory component is probably the most cautious one for me. But I know staff is going to be working with people. They're not out there. We're not making this mandatory so we can slam people, So I think it's a good tool to help us get organized as a city with this. And I don't think it's an onerous burden on a property owner. I think most people haven't registered because they didn't know, and I think if they say if tell them it's required, I don't think they're going to get all up in arms, especially if we tell them that this is going to help protect them from complaints, as well as help organize the city with pollinator quarters and everything else. I think it just helps to make a tool to help us get organized and work things out more smoothly. So I'm going to follow that recommendation here and make a motion to approve.
There's a motion by Alder Scannell to approve the ordinance as presented. Is there a second for that?
I'll second.
Second by Alder Burnett. Go ahead, Alder Burnett.
Mr. Dorff, I give from. I'm a big property rights guy, and I'm really conflicted too about the mandatory piece of registering. But I also am an alderman, and I've also dealt with a lot of these issues when there's comes with property disputes amongst neighbors. And I have had one in my district that Director Grenier knows probably what I'm talking about, and it's been a horrendous experience trying to find that proper way of dealing with this. And we've had the city law department, public works, the city's landscape architect, and the parks department trying to figure this out. And I think a required registration of that particular parcel of land would have alleviated so much of the issues that we've had to deal with. I'm hoping that the Public Works Department will bring something forward. If they think that voluntary registration will work, I want to believe that they'll bring that forward. But while we institute this change, to me, to give the staff the discretion to require that, because he's right. I think Director Grenier is correct. There are a lot of our staff members that don't have the knowledge of these particular vegetations that to some people appear to be beautiful to the eye and are native, but to people in our neighborhoods, they're horrendous and they're an eyesore. And that's just the reality of what we're dealing with. But I like what this ordinance is. I love the natural vegetation. I love the pollinator. I love everything about us. We need that transition period. So I'm going to agree with staff, although it goes against my belief in private property rights. And it kind of hurts me to go along with requiring people to do something. But I'm also an alderman, and I've been dealing with these sorts of issues for 5 years now, and it's difficult. So anyways, I'm in favor of it.
All right, thank you, Alder Burnett. Alder Gaylock.
Is there any way before passing this, and I agree, I understand it has to go to council, but is there any way to amend it or somehow hold it so that it does not go into effect until and unless there is a proper vehicle for registration? Because I hear you folks saying that for 10 years, people didn't register and it would have been so much better if they did, but I don't see any mechanism for doing that. And it just seems to me kind of opening ourselves up for trouble to say, well, now we're going to make you register and wait a minute, we'll figure out how that's going to be. Can we somehow make that part of moving forward, that we don't move this forward until there is a mechanism in place and available for that mandatory registration? It only makes sense. What do you think?
Procedurally, and Assistant Attorney Mather can correct me if I'm wrong here, procedurally, at a minimum, what will happen is, presuming that the committee approves this tonight, not only will the report of the Improvement Service Committee go forward before the council next week, but also under ordinance's first reading, the ordinance language will go forward in front of the Common Council. So at a bare minimum, it's going to take 2 readings in front of the Common Council before the ordinance could be enacted. If somebody wanted to amend the ordinance, that has happened multiple times in the past while under first or third reading, to put a effective date. So that would be, if you wanted to come up with a date certain, a July 1st, something along that line. Knowing Melissa the way that I do not think that it's going to take a whole lot for us to put together a registration system. I don't want to commit her because by me speaking up, I'm sort of sticking my own feet into the fire here, as it were, to assist in this process. It would be a little extraordinary, but not unheard of, for us to have such a registration process done, at least the framework for one, by the second and final reading 3 weeks from now. But I think that is a little aggressive. If you wanted to have a June 1st effective date, I think that's achievable for us to get some sort of a registration process put together on the web and in a hard copy format.
Okay. Alder Gallick, does that answer your question, or do you want to?
That's a start, but I'm going to let Alder Scannell talk. Okay. He'll figure it out.
Alder Scannell.
So if we did put a date, June 1st, July 1st, does that cause any kind of problems? Is there any problem with holding it up like that?
That's where I can see Assistant Attorney Mather is raising her hand, so I'm going to let her address that. I'm sure that's why she wants to chime in.
So it doesn't necessarily cause any problems. What I will say is that between now and June 1st, we are, barring any more unforeseen delays, we are going to be completing the recodification. So if the ordinances, I'm sorry, if the whatever you're creating, if it's going to be based on the ordinance numbers and those sorts of things, those will all have to be updated in order, like once the recodification is completely passed. And actually, the April 20th council meeting is the last. We've asked staff and committees not to have any new ordinances going after the ones this week that will appear at next week's council meeting, specifically because the second reading will be, I think, May 8th, and then we're hoping or May 5th or 4th or something. And then we're hoping at the second meeting in May, we're going to do the recodification, and all of the numbers of the ordinances are going to change. So the only thing that I can think of, actually, from my perspective, in my personal role, is that a delay would actually be very helpful, because then this wouldn't go into effect with these current numbers. It would only go into effect with the new numbers. That's just very selfish of me. It's not uncommon for us to have ordinances ordinances that would require some sort of permit or form for people to fill out, for that to go into effect with the understanding that the form has not yet been completed. It would just be like any part of our code that we can no longer enforce because it's been invalidated or something like that. Director Grenier could not direct his staff to enforce any part of the ordinance for non-compliance or anything like that, because we haven't made a form available yet for people to comply. So no, there's not any problems, but there's also no harm in waiting, I guess. That's entirely up to the committee.
I would just ask, does it matter June 1st or July 1st? Because I got no problem waiting until July 1st to make sure we got enough time, unless there's a reason not to wait that long for some reason.
Not from law's perspective.
Attorney Mather, am I correct in understanding that if this item were to be held at the committee level until, say, June, are you saying that might be advantageous from the recodification standpoint?
Yes. So if it were held at committee until then and passed through committee after whenever the recodification date is, that would be helpful. If it were passed now with an effective date of June 1st or whatever date you pick, that would the net effect would be the same as if the effective date was after its publication like it normally is. Okay,
because as Melissa indicated early in the presentation, this is the first of several of these ordinance modifications to ensure that there are no barriers to green infrastructure development that are coming through. There is no real driving factor saying that this must be recodified or this ordinance must be updated immediately. Obviously, we don't want the wheels to fall off and forget about it. But if there is a legitimate reason from a larger perspective, and that larger perspective, I'm familiar with all the work you've put in on the recodification. That is no small effort. And if it would be advantageous for us, if we're in agreement in concept on this, and we don't actually bring the ordinance forward until June 1st or July 1st, I don't think DPW has a problem with that.
So do you see any problems?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Randy?
Melissa, do you see any problems with holding it?
No, I don't see any problems with waiting. I do just want to reassure Alder Gerlach that on page 4, I mean, there is a very 4-step process, not really the process, but what is expected in a required plan, in a landscape plan that's submitted. So the components are there. But what you're concerned about, if I'm getting this correctly, is that we don't have like an actual process or mechanism. That would be an internal like staff policy procedure that we need to firm up. Is that your concern?
That is my concern, that I'm hearing, I mean, I didn't know anything about this 10 years ago or 2 years ago, but now I'm hearing people say, well, for 10 years, nobody's been registering because nobody really knew how. And I understand the director is saying it sure would be good if they were all registered. And
right.
I just feel like I want an insurance policy that it's not going to be another 10 years. And then we're going to say, well, we passed it, but we never made it. And I trust you that you're going to do it. It's just that I think we would be foolish to pass this as is and say, oh, well, we'll get to it.
Right. So we have the components for what are in a required registration. That's already laid out in the code, and it says to be submitted to the Department of Public Works. So we do have that in place. What that means is if we don't have an online portal set up June 1st, that means that somebody could put all their stuff together in an envelope, send it to Public Works. It's received, it's a plan, it's going to get filed, and it's going to be reviewed, and that process will continue. So I think we have a process outlined. Do we have an electronic process at this point? No, but I will see that we get there.
We're spending enough time on this item. Anything new to add, Attorney Mather?
If I could just make a suggestion that may appease Alder Gerlach's concerns. You could include in the motion that it would come back in July, come back to INS for an update from staff as to what the actual process looks like. And then that would, the ordinance would still be in effect, but you could also have that follow-up that would actually have Melissa come back and explain how it actually works.
Fair enough. Good. All right. Well, I don't know about you. Right now we have a motion and a second to approve. I'm fine with putting a date on it, whatever. June 1st, I think we can get it done. What do you want, Randy?
I would like to amend it to put a date on it. That let's see, we're gonna go.
Actually, I take it back. You can't change the effective date to beyond when the expected recodification will be, because then all the numbers will be wrong.
So we can't put, so we would be just a.
If you want it to not be in effect until June.
Attorney Mather, so if we wanted it effective June 1st, you would have to go through the approval process and then change again later. Is that what you're saying?
It would.
Because it's going to pass through council twice before June, effective.
Yes,
June, right?
But it would not be. It would not be codified until June 1st, at which point all of the numbers will have changed. Because even though it will have passed council, it doesn't actually become a code. A part of the code until its effective date.
Yeah. So June 1st is fine, is what you're saying. Figure it out on the back end.
That is not what I'm saying. If you would like to wait until June, my recommendation is to hold it. If you would like to not wait until then, whatever effective date you pick it's essentially going to have the same net effect. And if you should do it now so that it will be part of the code before the recodification happens.
All right, let's just pick one. What do you want, Randy? Let's just move forward. I'm ready to move forward with it now. I mean, staff can figure out the recodification later. That's fine. I just would like to get this thing going. I think we've all been working on this for how long. Let's get it approved, move forward.
Right. So I don't know if I need to.
Right now you have a motion and a second for June 1st, I believe. So.
Okay. Fine.
Anybody else change that or amend it?
No. And I hope during that time, staff can work on the forms and also maybe reach out to other groups to get feedback so that, when we're doing this, during the readings and stuff, we can tweak it as more groups get more and more involved, and we can see what happens with that.
I agree. I think it's good to move this thing forward. Enough things get mired down in red tape and government slow down stuff. So let's just get it moving. In a second to move this thing forward and have it effective June 1st. Any discussion on that?
I second the original motion, but with the amendment, I'll second.
Okay. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Dorff. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Attorney.
Thank you.
Any other thank yous? Barb, thank you. Anybody else? Number 3, consideration of possible action on request by Green Bay Water Utility to have the City of Green Bay waive the $30 plumbing fee for the galvanized water service replacement program. Director.
We do have Brian Powell from Green Bay Water Utility here with us tonight. I believe that what this is a parallel request to what Green Bay Water Utility brought forward some time ago when they started the lead replacement. With the lead service replacement, they did request that those plumbing fees be waived, which was granted by the city. And now that the last lead service is out, and Brian can correct me if I'm making a misstatement here. Now that the actual lead is out of the ground, the most likely place for any residual lead would be on the galvanized pipe. The lead adheres to the interior surface of that galvanized pipe, where it doesn't necessarily do that to the same frequency or same degree with either a plastic pipe or a copper pipe. So Water Utility is working on a very aggressive plan to get those galvanized pipes out and to make the galvanized program largely mirror what the lead service replacement program, the request has come in to waive those plumbing fees. So with that, we'll turn it over to Brian Powell.
Oh.
Yeah, Steve summed it up pretty good. Back in 2016, we went to a 5-year program to remove all lead services, our side, homeowner side. And part of the homeowner side was, we received graciously $300,000 of the excess landfill sales tax, and then the plumbing permit fees were waived. And we also received funding from the DNR, 2 rounds of funding. And we got all the lead out, and now it's the new lead and copper rule has kind of thrown a little curveball at us. They've now indicated that galvanized services that were once downstream of lead pose the next threat, that you'd have you could have lead particulates in those galvanized services. So the DNR actually, we've entered into what we would call round 3 of funding. And actually today we actually secured $1.4 million for funding on the private side services from the DNR. So we were just trying to mirror the program, like Steve said, we had before with waiving those permit fees.
What type of a time frame are you looking at with this process or this next phase? Is there a lot to be changed out?
Yet right now our records show that we have about 700 galvanized services that were once downstream of lead. With the private side lead program, we removed 250 private side. We removed 1,800 on our side with our own forces and contractors, but the private side, we did 250 with the funding. We have 700 to tackle with this funding.
Do you have an anticipated number that we'll be doing a year, or 100, 200?
Well, I got the 1.4 million. I had to submit an estimate, and I estimated that we would do 300 surveys. It would cost approximately $4,500 a piece. If we're able to, if they came in cheaper, they allowed us a dollar amount. So for cheaper, we in theory could do 350, 400. Up until we get to that 1.4 million mark, then our funds run out. And it's actually for this calendar year. The other programs had like multiple years. This is literally, we have to spend that money this year in 2021, and then we would have to resubmit for 2022.
Now, these galvanized water service, is that all under private property, or any of that under like sidewalks or streets?
None of them would be under streets, but some of them surely could be under sidewalks. It would depend where the shut off, where the stop is at. Sometimes our stop is right at the property line. Other times it's in between the sidewalk and back a curb, like in the terrace area.
Any questions from the committee? All right.
Motion to approve.
Anything else? Well, I guess we don't need to close it. So motion to approve by Alder Scannell. And is there a second to that?
I have one question.
Sure, go ahead. I didn't hear a second.
I always have trouble understanding the budgetary impact of these decisions. Can anybody?
Steve?
Well, real simple. If Brian is saying there's 700 services at $30 a service, that's $21,000. That would have been unbudgeted revenue, because I don't think anyone in the revenue would actually be through the inspection department. And nobody was anticipating somebody to replace 700 services. So that would not necessarily have been factored into their revenue projections, because the work is being done primarily by water utility personnel. I don't know if inspection department is required to come out and do routine inspections on these like they would for a private home or commercial development or something like that. So that would be something that, between now and council, I would suggest that you talk to the chief building inspector, Paul Van Kalster, to see if they would have any issue with the waiving of these fees, but I don't believe that they do. again, they agreed to the same thing with the lead in order to help us get the lead out of the ground as quickly as possible. So I'm not anticipating that they would have any issue with a similar arrangement for the galvanized.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Gerlach. We had a motion by Alder Scannell. Is there a second for approval?
Alder Burnett did, yes.
You did, okay. Second by Alder Burnett. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Let's get the lead out.
Again.
Yep.
Number 4, consideration of possible action on request by Department of Public Works to award the clerk's office conference room construction contract at a staff level and report the award at the next regular meeting of the Improvement Service Committee. Director, I didn't even know we were doing a conference room. Where is it?
They're reconfiguring some of the storage area alongside the clerk's office. Okay. This one is just a simple matter. I called the assistant director and said, we kind of dispensed with the summer schedule. Why are we looking to award something at a staff level if we've got meetings every 2 weeks? When the bids come in, it happens to be the 1 month that we are meeting once a month. So it is going to be a timeliness issue. There's, we have to get the money spent by a certain date. So every day that we delay is a problem in the ability to get the contractor in there and get the work taken care of. So that's why we're looking to get that pre-approval. Otherwise, we would be more than happy to just bring this through normally.
Is this something we already funded?
Yes, there is funding available for this.
Okay, what are we looking at roughly? What kind of a project? 10,000, 100,000?
That, I will be honest with you, I don't know. I haven't had those conversations with the clerk's office.
Any questions, Steph? Alder Burnett?
Yeah, Director Grenier, you said funding was available, but I think the better question would have been, was it a budgeted expenditure this budget year?
And again, I don't know. When it gets to things like, when it comes in from other departments, I'll be really, really honest with you. My big question for the other department is, do you have funding for this? And if they tell me yes, I'm a happy guy, okay? I worry about where my funding comes from, but I trust other department heads to take care of their own funding needs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the concern I have is if no one from the clerk's office is here to ask.
I do see Clerk Jeffries is here. I don't know if Clerk Jeffries, if you're able to log in or.
Yes, thank you. I'm here.
There we go. All right, perfect. Thanks. We might have a couple questions for you. Go ahead, Alder Burnett.
Yeah, Clerk Jeffries, thanks for being here. I just want to know what the project is, and I know you weren't clerk at the time, but was this a budgeted 2021 expenditure?
So Alder Burnett, this is not a budgeted 2021 expenditure. This project is to create an election prep area in the clerk's office. So anyone who's been down here during election has seen our temp helpers as well as our full-time staff basically find any space available to put together ward boxes. And there are many, many components that go into each one of those ward boxes to assemble absentee ballots, to make sure that we have a place to put voter registrations when they come in via paper. And so while we do have obviously some space available at everyone's desk, we don't have a place to store these materials, nor do we have a place to assemble them, nor do we have a place for people to comfortably do so. And so we have one of our intrepid temp help, and she was assembling, just recently, she was assembling one of our display boards on the floor in the middle of and so that's what the purpose of this area.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Now, the ballpark, I know this will have to go out to bid, but do you have a estimate?
I do. It's under 25,000.
Now, I would imagine that because we voted, even though I voted against it, to retain the 700,000+ from the Center for Tech and Civic Life grant. Would that money be used for this?
Yes, thank you, Alder. That is the for the funding source. Indeed.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're
Clerk
welcome.
Jeffries.
Any other questions from the committee? Anything else you wanted to add, Celestine? No? Okay. What are your wishes, committee?
So sorry, Alderman Weary, there is something I would love to add.
Sure.
This is really needed. We have a lot of organizing to do down here in the clerk's office, and we're very public facing. And so it's my goal to make our office not only pleasurable for our full-time employees, pleasurable for our temp staff, which also includes tax collection from December to February, but also for the members of the public. So thank you for allowing me to add that.
Perfect. Celestine, when you enter the clerk's office, will it be to the right, kind of that area
Sure.
off to the right?
So if you come into the clerk's office in the foyer area, it would be actually what I'm doing is making my office smaller and using the back area. So most people don't see the back area. So when you come in from the parking lot door, there's a door immediately to your left that basically enters our sort of storage area. So it would be essentially the entire back part of the office with this election prep area with shelving, tables. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Games.
Just trying to visualize it. Perfect. Thank you. Alder Gaylak?
I have visualized it, and I'll share it with you because you might know I agreed to become a chief inspector at the very last minute before the last election, and I had to go in for private tutoring after I took my online course on a Saturday morning, and I spent 2 hours with the clerk learning how to be a chief inspector very quickly. And her office was quite a mess. And we had to try to find a place to even sit and write something. And then she explained to me that how she would move her office forward and have half of the space be her office. And the back part would be this storage and assembly space. And for one who was sitting there a few days before an election, seeing all this stuff, it made perfect sense to me. So if you trust me, take my word for it.
All right. Thanks, Lynn. Did we have a motion and a second to approve? There we go. Motion
Second.
by Alder Scannell, second by Alder Gaylak to approve. Any discussion on this one? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thanks, Celestine.
Thank you.
Okay. Number 5, consideration with possible action on a request by Department of Public Works to accept the grant from the Environmental Protection Agency and enter into contract with Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, complete the scope of work and the project at the Pink Farm Marsh.
Bree Kupski from Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has been patiently waiting along with us all night here. Very short synopsis of this. Back in September, we brought forward a couple of projects, some of them through Parks Committee and one through INS, that were, we sought the approval from committee and council to seek out grant funding to complete these projects. Short answer is Tank Farm Marsh has been granted that funding. We are now back asking for your permission to accept that funding and complete the project.
Yay, money's good.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Bree's even sitting out at the water right now. Look at that, she's even.
And we gotta tip our hats and give all the commendation to Bree. She has been the one driving this project. She's been the one applying for the funding. She's the one who's keeping these things moving forward. Unfortunately, DNR can't do the project. That's where we come in. As the partner agency, we're available to accept that funding and help administer the grant and go forward with some of this. So it's been a great partnership. We're very, very happy. And this is the first of many projects that we'd like to see go forward here in Green Bay.
Excellent. Bree, anything you want to add to that?
Do we need to open the floor?
Yeah, yes, we would.
Motion to open the floor.
Motion by Alder Scannell, second by Alder Burnett to open the floor. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Go ahead.
Bree Kupski, 3915 White Pine Drive, Green Bay, Wisconsin. So the only thing that I add to that is just this is one of, I think, 5 different projects that we are entering into a potential partnership with the city of Green Bay, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding to actually implement habitat restoration projects. So I'm really excited. It's been a great partnership on our end as well. And I guess as far as like the timeline, We're looking to submit that final grant proposal with the city and DNR both submitting that to EPA at the end of this month. And then we'd be looking to start the contract for that project to provide full project design funding. So it's not actually to implement the project, it's just to design it at this point in the July timeframe. And so it would be about a year that we'd expect that we'd be going through that process of the city actually doing the contracting for the full design with, whatever contractor actually bids out on the project. And DNR will be in sort of an advisory role and more of a grant oversight role on this one and any subsequent projects that we work on with the city of Green Bay. And then we're hoping that by the end of next year, so by the end of 2022, we'd have a full project design, and then we'd go back to GLRI and some other funders and ask for funding to actually implement the project. So yeah, I'm very excited.
Alder Burnett, did you have a question?
Yeah, Ms. Kupski, thanks for sticking with us and for bringing forward this great news. Just a quick question. When I hear tank, I always think back to Tank Park, that general area where Auto Tank owned property. Is that where this is?
No, so this is down around, so when you're driving over 43 going towards the west side of Green Bay, you see all those kind of tanks out on the southern shoreline of the bay where the old Pulliam power plant used to be. It's the marsh area. There's a big kind of open water marsh. And that's where we're really trying to do this work. So a lot of the work is really focused on doing invasive species management. We'll be evaluating with sort of adjacent landowners who, a lot of them are private landowners, whether or not we can deal with the water control issue a little bit. But yeah, it's over in that area of the bay.
Now, Ken Ewers City Park, Ken Ewers Park area.
Yeah. Okay. No, not that far over.
Not that far, just a little bit back.
Atkinson Drive back to Billsby.
Okay.
So between Atkinson Drive and the river, and then north to Hurlbutt.
Yeah, where the Yardway Center is in that general area. General, I'm not talking specific. General.
Yeah, another mile back towards the river, and you're right on it.
All right. Thank you.
Still my district.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Bree. I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Alder Scannell.
Second.
Second by Alder Burnett to return to the regular order. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. What do you wishes?
Second.
Motion by Alder Scannell. Second by Alder Burnett to approve. Any discussion on that?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Good job. Number 6, consideration with possible action on the report of the purchasing manager for approval of award to U.S. Petroleum Equipment for the replacement of the Fuel Master system at the Department of Public Works shops for the sum of $28,215. The Fuel Master system was competitively bid on Sourcewell contract 092920-SYS.
I'll start this off and then turn it over to Operations Manager Pierlot. The short version of this is the automated fueling system or fuel tracking system that we utilize at our garages for fueling fleet vehicles has reached the end of its active service life, and we can no longer get parts for it. So we need to replace that automated fueling system. Nathan and Chris have been actively working with vendors to make sure that we're getting what we need and something that'll last us for a long time, and then working with the purchasing department. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris and he can fill in any of the blanks here.
Yeah, Steve pretty much stole all the thunder on the details, but just to elaborate, just a hint. Our fuel system serves DPW, police, fire, park and rec at multiple locations. The county, some of the county vehicles like bookmobile and the library vehicles, some other human services vehicles fuel with us. The smaller buses, they fuel daily with us. So we have to kind of stay in business, not only kind of, we actually have to stay in business with fueling vehicles for all of the core services of the city and many of the county as well. So yeah, it's the system's it's supported only in as much as if they can fix what we have. So we have all of a sudden have an obsolete system, and we just have to upgrade. Where it's unfortunately didn't fail at budget time last year, but we got a decent price, when we were shopping around.
Any questions from the committee? All right, Alder Gillick.
How do we pay for this if it wasn't budgeted for?
We actually had some of our capital needs come in a little bit under budget, so we're utilizing those savings rather than rolling them forward.
Thank you.
Basically as a contingency fund.
Motion by Alder Scannell to approve.
Second.
Second by Alder Gerlach. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So that carried. All right. Number 6 is doneth. 7, consideration of possible action review and award of the following contracts. A, Bridge 121, Atkinson Drive over CNWC Railroad, B5225, expansion joint replacement.
Okay. We had 3 bidders. Highway Landscapers was the low responsive bidder at $208,050. Recommendation is to go with Highway Landscapers in the amount of $208,050. This again is for an expansion joint on the Atkinson Bridge going over the CN Railroad. There's multiple bridges up there. Where Atkinson goes over the rail, it's our bridge. Where Atkinson goes over I-43, it's a DOT bridge, and one of the expansion joints is failing over the railroad. So,
all right.
Motion to approve.
All right. There is a motion by Alder Scannell.
Second.
Second by Alder Gerlach to award the Bridge 121 contract to the low bidder, Highway Landscapers, Inc. for $208,050. Any discussion on that? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. B is review and award the contract for ramps 121 Main Street parking ramp facade removal.
On the southwest stair tower and up the west side of the ramp, right up against Schreiber Foods, that's one of the last remaining spots on the Main Street ramp where there is a brick facade. Most of the other has been replaced. Shortly after Schreiber Foods went in, the RDA funded the architectural cladding components on the south and east side of the Main Street ramp and around the north and west side of Pine Street. So there's this one area that has brick facade on it yet. And during routine inspection over the winter, staff noticed that the brick appeared to be buckling. So we had our contractor go in, do a little snooping around, and found out that some of the tiebacks that hold that brick facade in place are starting to fail. Given the age of that ramp, not entirely unexpected. So what we did is kind of took a look and said, what would it take to kind of pull that stuff back? It turns out that the damage to some of those anchor points was a little bit more extensive than we had anticipated. And given the fact that that ramp is not long for this world, again, remember when we did the developers agreement with Schreiber Foods, that ramp has to come down by 2031. So meeting with staff, we determined the best course of action, the most cost-effective course of action for us would be to remove all that brick and simply put up a similar facade to what's on the other stair towers. So with that in mind, staff went ahead and prepared the bids. We had one bidder. That bidder was Central Restoration LLC, who is the same bidder who's doing our ramp repair work. And that's where the funding for this is coming from. We're cutting back a little bit on the ramp repairs and using that money to restore to do the facade work. So we're happy with the number that came back. Central is a very good company. They've worked with us very well over the past number of years. So staff does recommend award of this contract to Central Restoration LLC in the amount of $91,593.
There a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Alder Scannell, second by Alder Gerlach to approve the awarding of the bid ramps 121 to Central Restoration LLC, $91,593. Discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries.
If there's any extra, can I get a facade remove?
Not a bad idea. All right, C, South Bay Shore Dike Reinforcement segments 20 to 22.
And with this one, I'm gonna have to check in with the assistant director. Jim, does this get us all the way down to the end, or is this only halfway?
No, this finishes all the segments up to Mahone Creek.
Oh, okay. So this would be the second phase of the dike repairs. Again, we would have loved to have gone all the way to the end last year, but we only had funding to go a certain distance, and due to bidding statutes, we couldn't extend that bid. So to pick up where we left off last fall and finish up all the way down to Mahone Creek, staff put the second set of bids out. We had 5 bidders, very competitive bids. Vinton Construction, who did the original work on phase 1, was again successful this year. Staff recommends award of the bid in the amount of $443,553.75.
Questions? Motions?
Motion approved. Second.
Motion by Alder Gerlach, second by Alder Scannell to approve. Any discussion on that? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carry. All right, number 8, report the award of the following contracts. A, pavement 221 Jackson Street reconstruction, and B, pavement 321 South Jackson Street reconstruction.
We had come to you a couple of weeks ago asking for the ability to approve these at a staff level and report out. Again, this is because given the size of these Jackson Street projects, the sheer amount of work that needs to happen there this year, timeliness was critical on this. So we did receive the bids on the 221, and I believe the 221 is the south portion from the South City limits up to Mason Street. One of them is South City limits to Mason Street, and the other one is Mason Street essentially to Main Street. Okay, so on the 221 project, we had 6 bidders. Low bid was Soper Sewer and Water LLC in the amount of $2,316,702.99, and that's all in water, sanitary, storm, and pavement. We have verified that the money in the capital improvement program for this year is sufficient to cover that project. Pavement 3-21 is the second phase of that project. Again, had 6 bidders. Peters Concrete Company had the low responsive bid in the amount of $2,263,864.75. And there was money from this year's capital program to cover those. So staff did make those awards, and contracts are being executed, circulated, so we can get the contractor working as soon as possible out there.
All right, I'd like to see all the bids. Perfect. Any questions from the committee?
Motion to receive and place on file.
All right. There's
Second.
a motion by Alder Scannell to receive and place on file, second by Alder Gerlach. Discussion. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Number 9, consideration with possible action on acquisition of right-of-way for tax parcel 5-1363 for improvements to Gray Street from Dousman to Mather.
Included in the packet, we've got some documentation in there. The church between Kellogg and Division Street has traditional squared corners at the intersections for right-of-way. We would like to have those corners radiused for vision triangle purposes. So there are 2 very, very small pieces of right-of-way that we are looking to acquire from the property owner. Property owner has indicated that they are in agreement with this. This is what we refer to as a nominal fee take. Fee meaning that we will actually take ownership of the property. It becomes city right-of-way and just gets attached to the right-of-way adjacent to it in the terrace areas. And nominal because it's a very small piece, and based on current property values, the payment that would be offered for these 2 right-of-way corners is $500. This would be funded by the city's right-of-way account.
All right. Questions?
Right away with me. Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Alder Scannell, second by Alder Gerlach to approve. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Number 10, report of actions taken by Department of Public Works. A, granting licenses. Sidewalk builder, E&I Concrete, Everett's Concrete, Fisher Ullman Construction, Karowski Construction, N&L Concrete, and R.G. Hendricks and Sons. And 2 is tree and brush trimmer, A to Z service, and 3 is underground sprinkler system, ADC maintenance. Those are the licenses granted.
Motion to receive and place on file.
Motion by Alder Scannell to receive and place on file.
Second.
Second by Alder Gerlach. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Look at that. We made it informational. Director, what can you inform us about?
2 very brief things. First one, Monday of this week, we started curbside yard waste collection for the spring. Chris has been very active on social media, making sure that we're identifying to residents where we are within the routes and letting folks know how our progress is going. So spring yard waste collection has started. Today is the 3rd anniversary of a 24.2-inch blizzard that we all survived and hopefully have flushed all memory of. Although it snowed a little bit today, definitely not what we experienced 3 years ago. We're thankful for that. And then I just wanted to express my personal thanks. My staff has been incredible. Not that I expected anything different. They're always incredible, but they've done a great job over the past 4.5 weeks that I've been out of the office in making sure that the department continues to operate and provide that service that our residents and taxpayers expect. So I just wanted to express my thanks and appreciation to my staff for everything that they're doing in my absence.
Just one thing I'd like to add to Steve about the spring yard waste collection. It is going very well. Of course, we're in our first week. East side, we've gone through 3 of the routes. We started in Thursday routes. Thursday, Friday, and Monday routes are done on the east side. On the west side, we're still working on Thursday routes and a little bit in Friday routes. So there's more material on the west side. Now, along with that, our discussions today, because as mentioned earlier in this meeting, we were out doing enforcement, if you will, just so we can follow up with education material for those residents who are, we see stuff in the road. On the west side, we did do 1 complete round through the west side so far with visualizing, visual enforcement. And I got to verify the number, but verbally, the number I got is they only found, the 0 is a great number, but this is still a great number, in my opinion, because we have so many properties in the city of Green Bay. They only documented 125 violation areas on the west side in the first round. Now, like I said, I have to verify that number, but that's significantly lower than it has been ever. And we've been doing this now for 3 rounds, 2 falls and a spring before this. So I'm happy to hear that. Like I said, we're going to verify, and then we will be educating the residents and working with them to. So like I said, we just want them to comply and do the right thing for the environment.
Excellent. Any other updates, Steve or Chris? Otherwise, questions? Alder Scannell?
Steve, with the city deck docks, do we still need to look at that to see what we need to do to be able to put in docks no matter what the water level? Like we did on the site?
Staff is actively looking at that, yes.
Oh, okay. Super.
Trust me, nobody wants those docks in more than I do, because most of the complaints wind up on my desk. If there was a way to safely get them in and make sure that we're not putting our valuable assets in jeopardy, right, I'd be the first one to get those things in the water.
Right, and I know that, but I'm hearing it too. And I was just curious as, because I put in the communication about what we can do to fix the dock so we don't have to worry about water levels. So I was just wondering how that was going with city deck.
Yeah, we're looking at it.
Okay, super.
All right, anybody else? Who wants to receive and place it on file?
Motion to receive and place on file.
Alder Scannell, Alder Gerlach. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Looks like we're meeting on April 28th is our next. And parting is such sweet sorrow, but
motion to adjourn.
It's that time. All right, motion by Alder Scannell, second by Alder Gerlach. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Everybody have a super duper week.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Take it easy.